everybody, welcome to Alan Wall's Photography. I am Alan, and today we are breaking the 5x barrier, and we're going to be looking at the Nikon 10x microscope objective and how to use it to take incredible pictures. It seems like we've been working our way towards this video for some months now, but it's going to be well worth it, because this is where macro photography really starts to get incredible, indescribable even. Before we get started though, a quick announcement concerning the My Pandemic photography competition. I have received several emails from people asking why they haven't received their ballots for the voting yet in the competition, and that's my fault. I should have emailed everybody, but I didn't. That was when I wasn't feeling very well, and I think it just escaped my mind. But I'm going to announce again that the competition will remain open to entries through the end of May 2020. So if you haven't got your picture in, then please hurry up and do so. And if you have and you're waiting for your ballot, as soon as the month is over, hopefully in the first day or two of June, I'll send you a link to all the photographs with instructions on how to cast your votes. I apologize for the poor quality of the last video. I decided to this was the one on shooting jewelry. I was trying something new, as you could tell, and I won't try it again. I was using an action camera to record some of the footage, and I guess I don't know how to use it. So I apologize for that. And I think that's all that I have. Twice this morning, as I was setting up for this video, there was a knock at my front door. And when I went out there, there wasn't anybody there. It happened first, and then an hour later it happened again. Do any of you bird lovers out there know if plovers do that as well? Knock on doors and run away? All right, down to business. Now I'm going to start out by giving you an overview of my personal preferences about what lens or what type of lens to use for different kinds of macro photography at different magnifications. This is by way of introducing you to why I am so excited about the Nikon Plan 10x objective that we're going to be talking about. Then I'll explain to you the difference between the 10x Nikon that we're going to be looking at and the AmScope 4x objective a lot of you have already been working with. So we'll compare the two, and there are some really significant differences. And then I'll get into the nuts and bolts of how you use this objective with the gear that you've already got. So we've got a lot to cover. We'll start out with my personal preferences, because I think it's important when you're getting into higher magnification macro. You need to kind of have a roadmap or a plan as to what tools you're going to use to get to your objective. So this is what I do. Other macro photographers' mileage may vary, but I have reasons for all of these choices. If I am shooting macro in the field or in the studio, even stacking in the studio, and I'm looking for around or under 1:1 magnification, I will almost always use a macro lens, either one of my Nikon lenses or this Tamron, which is one of my absolute favorites. Very sharp, very easy to use lens. When I want to shoot above 1:1 into the range of about 3:1, I will almost always use an enlarger lens or a reversed prime lens on some kind of extension, whether it's a set of extension tubes, a bellows, I've got to the point where I use the bellows for almost everything because it's so flexible. It can become an extension tube of any length that you need. So that's what I do if I'm going for 1x all the way to 3x. Beyond that point, I don't use camera lenses at all. I don't use enlarger lenses either. From that point forward, I use only microscope objectives. And we've talked about the 4x. This is my go-to 4x lens. I've done a whole video on this, but this is a $20 objective. And the comparable Mitutoyo beautiful objective in 5x is about $800, $900, I think. So that's the reason I use this. It's inexpensive and gives great results. For anything 5x or above, so this is what I call extreme macro photography when we get into the 5:1 magnification and higher. My number one choice is the objective we're talking about today, the Nikon Plan 10x achromat. And I'll go into all of the reasons why that is the case. But that is a lens that can be used at 5x, 7x, 10, all the way up to the full 10x. So it covers an enormous amount of ground. I'll go into the details of why this particular lens is preferable over other 10x objectives as I explain about how they're put together and what they can do. So I follow those guidelines pretty rigidly. Just because a lens, I'm thinking of the Venus Optics lenses and the Canon MPE 65, just because a camera lens can shoot at 5x does not mean that it is the best choice at 5x. My experience is that the limitations of high magnification using something like the Canon lens, the softening that you get with diffraction as a result of the very high effective apertures you're working with, make the option of using a microscope objective much more practical. So just because you can do it doesn't mean it's the best way to do it, which is why I'm going to be focusing on objectives today. All right. So let's talk for just a minute about this Nikon objective. So what is it that is so magical about the Nikon Plan 10x 0.25 OFN 22 WD 10.5? This is a different kind of microscope objective than the 4x that we've been using. And it is a fundamental difference, and it's kind of important that you understand because it changes the way we use this objective. The 4x by Amscope is an older style of objective. It's called a finite objective. Very simply, what a finite objective does is it collects light from your subject and it focuses that light onto a plane at 160 millimeters distant. So this objective does everything optical that you need to take the photographs. It acts just like a camera lens. Because you have to have separation of 160 centimeters before the image is in focus, we use extension tubes or bellows to extend the distance from sensor to subject. Now, the reason for that is the majority of microscopes, this is not a compound microscope I'm getting to show you. It's just for explanatory purposes. When a microscope, if this were a compound microscope, the objective would sit down here and the extension from the objective to the eyepiece, which would be in a straight line, would be 160 millimeters. It's designed to work that way, which means this is only ever going to give you approximately 4x magnification, but it does that extremely well. The 10x that we're going to be talking about has been corrected for infinity, meaning that as the light is collected, I'll do it the same way around, as the light is collected from the subject and it passes through the objective does not output a focusing beam of light that projects an image anywhere. In fact, what it does put out is a flux of parallel light waves, meaning all of the light leaving this objective is traveling in a column called a flux of light rays that are all headed in the same direction. They're not converging like these. Theoretically speaking, they will remain parallel to infinity. That's not where the name infinity corrected comes from, though, because there are finite limitations to how far it can go. So because the light is coming out of this in a bunch of parallel rays, we have to have something between this and between our camera's sensor that is going to focus those light waves into an image on your sensor. That is absolutely crucial. This does not need that. The piece of equipment that we use to focus the infinity corrected light rays coming out of the objective is called a tube lens. And most of what we're going to be talking about today is the tube lens. What is it? Where do you get it? How do you make it? Can you buy one? That type of thing. The reason that the infinity corrected objectives were invented in the first place, way back in 1930, was because in microscopy, when you're using this with a microscope, initially these were the objectives that were used. Pretty much all the objectives were finite. And using this, there was no place in the optics of a microscope where you could interfere with the light rays, say to add a mirrored surface or to somehow adapt the light rays for a particular kind of microscopy. So somebody needed to invent an objective that would have, at least for a part of its the light's travel from the objective to the eyepiece, an area where you could add different elements to affect the light before it gets to the tube lens. And that's why the infinity corrected objective was invented, so that microscopists could put elements between this and the tube lens without interfering with the image that's being collected at the level of the eyepiece or the sensor, but at the same time be able to modify the light that they're seeing for their particular microscopic needs. Does that make sense? I hope so. The space between the objective and the tube lens is called the infinity space, because that is the space where the light is traveling in parallel flux before it hits another lens element that is going to focus it on the sensor. All this is important because it means a couple of key things to photographers. First of all, it informs us that our tube lens is something that we have control over. We can use different tube lenses and focal lengths to use the objective at different magnifications. You're pretty much stuck at 4x with this. But this 10x Nikon also happens to be a breathtakingly sharp 5x objective, a very good 7x objective, and of course a top-notch 10x objective. And all that comes from the tube lens. So while it seems like using an infinity objective is unnecessarily complicated or expensive because you have to add another lens. What in fact it is 3 or more objectives all in one, meaning I can use this identical objective with a number of different setups to use it for different magnifications. Let's talk very quickly about the markings on your objective. In case you're in the market for a used objective and you're looking at other brands, let me explain what the markings mean and what makes this a good lens for photography where many other lenses with 10x stamped on them are not. The first line is the maker, and most microscope objectives are marked using a similar convention. So Nikon is the maker. Plan is the same as plano and PL. It's an abbreviation for planar. You'd have thought they could have just left the AR on the end and left it planar. But what that means is that the optics in this objective are corrected to create a flat field. That is so important in high magnification and in focus stacking. It means that it corrects the light much the same way that our enlarger lenses do, meaning that it will project the light in focus onto a flat plane, as opposed to a plane with curvature, which would lead to having areas of the field of view not sharp, not in focus. And that would make focus stacking very difficult. And so this objective has been corrected to present the image onto a flat field. The 10x means its maximum magnification rating is 10 times. The 0.25 is the numerical aperture, and we'll talk more about that in just a minute. The next line of writing has an infinity symbol. Pretty much all infinity corrected objectives will have that infinity symbol. That means exactly what we were just talking about, that the light rays have been corrected to come out of this objective in a parallel flux, awaiting further focusing by the tube lens. Then there is a WD 10.5. That is the working distance in millimeters. Now, I have said many times that this is the best microscope objective. It is if you consider cost and availability, but there are objectives that are also corrected for flat plane, but have a working distance much larger than this. But as the working distance gets larger, so does the price. Mitutoyo makes a 10x objective that sells for about $900, but it has twice the working distance of this lens. This is a $200 eBay used lens or a $250 brand new copy. Whereas you can pick up Mitutoyos for $200-300 on eBay used, so you're not really quite sure what you're getting. These are very delicate pieces of gear, so buying used is risky, but you can pick a Mitutoyo 10X for about $200 or new for like I say, $800 or $900. This particular objective is called an achromat, meaning that it has been corrected for chromatic aberrations, and that is critical. When the light leaves this objective, those corrections have already been made. In some objectives that you will buy, the chromatic aberration correction actually happens in the eyepiece. Oh, My eyepieces apparently don't come out of my microscope, but you need to be absolutely sure when you're buying a microscope objective that all of the corrections that you need, the chromatic aberration correction and the flat field correction, are all happening in the objective. If they are sending light to the eyepiece where the eyepiece is going to remove the chromatic aberration, that is not going to be a useful objective for photography. So you need the package that does it all in one. There is an even higher rating of chromatic aberration correction called the APO. It's apochromatic. And you'll see a lot of the high-end Mitutoyo objectives are listed as Mitutoyo Plan APO. And this is not does not use that same technology, but it does get rid of a great deal of the chromatic aberration. By the way, the yellow band is a microscopy standard with most brands. Olympus and Mitutoyo, Nikon all use it. Yellow is the band for a 10x objective. Red is the color band for a 4x objective. And don't ask me what the other ones are, I don't know. Another feature of infinity objectives that you need to pay attention to when you buy one of these things, especially if it's an off-brand, is finding out how big the image circle a particular objective is going to produce. One of the reasons this and the Mitutoyos that I'm talking about are so prized and so loved by photographers is they have pretty large image circles. This objective can actually be used with a full frame camera, which is impressive. A lot of 10x objectives cannot cover a full frame camera. Some of them can't completely cover a crop frame camera. So that's something you need to pay attention to. Make sure that you get an objective that's going to give you a large enough image circle so that you don't have ugly vignetting. So let's talk about the options for the tube lens. All we've talked about so far is the objective and the infinity space. So the light is entering the tube lens as a flux of parallel rays. You can think of it as your garden hose on sprinkle. It's the light's coming out in parallel rays, and we need a way to then focus those light rays onto the sensor. And that's what a tube lens is. A tube lens can be a camera lens, it can be a dedicated tube lens, or you can make one yourself. The optics in the objective kind of trump the optics in the tube lens, meaning you can get away with a lower quality tube lens, certainly easier than you could get away with a low quality objective. So let's talk about the various options. Probably the simplest way to use an objective like this would be with a lens. Now, it is important that we understand the relationship between the focal distance of the lens that you're going to use and the magnification that the system will give you. Let me explain what I mean by that. If we were to use, say, this lens, this is a 70 to 200. It's a zoom lens, and zoom lenses are not as good as using prime lenses, but I don't have a 200 millimeter prime lens. Prime lenses are the best. Good quality zoom lenses are the best, providing you are using them at their full zoom. And the least useful is the macro lens. Macro lenses are not effective as tube lenses because of the way the elements are arranged and how recessed the front element of most macro lenses is. So your macro lens is not going to help you here. But if you have a telephoto lens that has a focal distance of 200 millimeters, that is the ideal tube lens to use to get the full 10x magnification out of this objective. The way you would mount it is really pretty straightforward. I've got a filter on there. I'll tell you what, I'm going to leave it on there for now. But the way you would adapt your lens to act as a tube lens would simply be to add some step down rings. In this case, I have this is a 77 filter thread on this lens. I have a 77 to 52 millimeter step down, but I can't put my hands on it. It's probably tied up with some other lens. It's not too difficult to step down from 77 to 52 millimeters in several steps like this. And all this does, by the way, is increase the infinity space between the objective and the front element of the tube lens, which is going to affect the size of your image circle, but it's probably not going to affect the image quality. So that's very important to remember. In the perfect world, you would want as little space as you could get between the front of your tube lens and your objective. Though I have read articles suggesting that that is not the case in all cases, and sometimes the image quality can improve with a slightly longer distance. But a good rule of thumb is get your objective as close to your tube lens as you can, and you'll usually be okay. Now, 25 millimeters, which is the thread size for this objective, is an unusual size. It's not the typical 20 millimeter RMS, what's 0.8 inch RMS thread. It's 25 because, and there's a reason for it. It's because we have a large numeric aperture in here, and we need all that light to get out. So an RMS thread would not leave enough room for the empty space in the objective. And to the best of my knowledge, there is only one adapter that comes in 25 millimeters. I have looked all over the place. Some optical houses have them in strange sizes, but they also have them in strange prices that don't compute. The most likely one you are going to find is the 25 millimeter to 52 millimeter, and it acts pretty much as an objective adapter only. I mean, there's not much else I would ever use this for. But the adapter takes the objective perfectly, leaves it flush. And the reason you want it flush is because you want to be as close to this lens as possible. And if I had my 77 to 52, this would attach right there. But this is a second alternative. And that right there is the setup that you can use, one of the setups you can use. You have to make sure that you're at your full extent 200 millimeters and focused on infinity. That is important because you're dealing with parallel light rays. So this would be a perfectly adequate way to do it. It's not, in my opinion, the best way. There's a better way that's even cheaper. This is not an inexpensive lens. I think this is about $1,000 lens. So it's definitely not the cheapest way to go. You can buy tube lenses that are dedicated tube lenses. They are made to be used as a tube with a microscope objective. Places like microscope and telescope supply companies make these things. Thor Labs is one. I'll put a link in the show notes. They will use tubes like this, which is an M42, 42 millimeter extension tube. This is a cheap version of the ones that they make, and they're nice and thick-walled, heavy metal. And you can purchase an assembly like this that somewhere in the column has a lens of focal length 200 millimeters that you would then attach your objective to. That is also a simple way. But frankly, I think that the prices that they charge for tube lenses are unnecessarily high, given that there are far, far cheaper ways to do it, where you don't need special sized tubes and a lot of weird adapters. So the third way is by building your own tube lens. Now, what do I mean by that? There is a lens that you can purchase online called the Raynox diopter. This is the Raynox diopter. It is designed to screw on to the front of your lens, your telephoto lens, to be a magnifying glass, basically. It's kind of like the very bargain basement entry-level macro photography. It will slightly magnify the image using a regular lens. However, this particular lens, the Raynox M150, also called the DCR, pretty sure that's what it is. Anyway, the Raynox comes in a variety of different sizes and focal lengths. This one, the M150, has a focal length of 208 millimeters, meaning that if we place this at its focal length from the sensor, 208 millimeters, and then attach the objective as close as we can to the front of the tube lens we've just made, we will have a full 10x magnification for $60. This is $61, the Raynox 150. It also comes in a 250, the M250, the DCR 250. I'm not sure if it is DCR. It's also called the M250. That lens has a focal length of 100 millimeters. So if you were going to use the 250, you would need to place it on 100 millimeters of extension tubes and then add the objective as close to the front as you could. And that would give you 5 times magnification. What is key is whichever Raynox diopter you're using, you have to use it at its focal length. You can calculate the focal length from the diopter. It's actually 1,000 divided by the diopter, which in this case is 4.8 or there around the strength of the diopter. And you divide that into 1,000 and you get 208. So that is the focal length that we would need. So if we're using a Raynox, we need to use it as its focal length, and that is critically important. Another rule of thumb is if you're using the Raynox as your tube lens, you want to mount the objective pretty close to it. Now, the Raynox, you may wish to use it in its normal orientation with the knurled part facing forward, as it would be if you'd mounted it on a camera. But some people would argue that these tube lenses are more effective if the lens is reversed. This is one of those things that you try it both ways and you decide which one works best for you. I'm sure that there is some variation from copy to copy of this lens. I prefer to use it reversed. This is actually not just a cheap piece of glass. This has 3 elements in it. Well, 3 elements and 2 groups. It's a nice piece of optics here. It's pretty okay as a diopter screwed on the front of a camera, but it's really excellent as a tube lens. So without getting too deep into the woods on the various ways you can construct a tube lens with one of these Raynox, we're just going to stick with the 150 because it's easy numbers to remember. So how do we make this from a diopter into a tube lens? Well, we can connect it to 208 millimeters of extension. Actually, it's 208 millimeters minus your flange focal distance of your camera. 46.5 millimeters for Nikons, and if you're using mirrorless, it's about 22 millimeters. So you need to subtract that. So extension tubes is one way to go, and you're probably using a camera brand specific extension tube. By the way, don't waste money on getting extension tubes that have electrical connections in them. This thing doesn't have any electrical connections. There's no point sending electricity down to this. It can't do anything about it. Neither does this. So just cheap extension tubes are fine. So we need to find a way to position this forwards or backwards on the extension tubes. Now, it can be done. There are adapters for everything. It's just a matter of coming up with the easiest way to do it. And it's a case by case, depends what kind of camera you have. For the sake of this discussion, I'm going to tell you how I mount it on a Nikon F mount, but it will be exactly the same for whatever camera mount you have. You just have to change the name of the camera mount. So let's build the tube lens that I use for this objective to use it at full power. We need, first of all, to set the bellows or the extension tubes, if you'd rather use extension tubes, for the correct focal distance. So the Raynox M150 has a focal distance of 208 millimeters. It's in the product website, the spec sheet for this. You can also calculate it from the diopter. We won't get into all that math today, but we do know it's 208 millimeters. We also know that the flange focal distance on the camera I will be using with this is 46.5. I need 161.5 millimeters between the flange of my camera, where never ever lay down a bellows to show somebody something, because the worst thing that you can do to a bellows is get a hole in the fabric that makes the bellows. Because once a hole gets in there, it causes light, and when we're using things like microscope objectives, it'll ruin the image. You'll end up with a big splodge of white on your photographs. So I'm not going to lay this down. I'll just hold it down so the other camera can see it. So we know that from the flange here to the Raynox needs to be 161. All right, fair enough. We can dial that in. So now I have the distance right, but that is kind of assuming that the Raynox is going to sit right flush at the opening of the bellows. It's close to that, but not exactly. Now, we're going to use this mounted forwards, but if you'd like, I can also show you how to mount it backwards. It just means using different adapters. But first, we'll mount it forwards. Now, this thing has some weird thread sizes. The thread on the back of the Raynox is 43 millimeters, which means it doesn't play well with 42 millimeter tubes. and you require an adapter to fit this into the bayonet mount for, in this case, an F-mount camera, basically. So what we need is an adapter like this, and I'll show a clearer picture of this, that has an F-mount on one side that will fit in here, and then a thread that will accept the diopter. Now, as it just so happens, this is a very common M42 to F-mount adapter. I have never seen an M43 to F-mount adapter. That doesn't mean they don't exist. I've just never found one, which is strange. But that's the thing about adapters. Some of them just seem to not exist, where it seems like it should be pretty easy to make them. This will not fit. It's exactly 1 millimeter too big. It wants to fit. It feels like you could force it on there, but you can't. So we have to fit a 43 millimeter screw into a 42 millimeter adapter ring or mounting ring. So what we need is a 1 millimeter step down ring, and they actually do make these. This is the M42 to M43 adapter. So we screw on the M43 side and it fits perfectly on the Raynox. It's even the same color. And this M42 thread fits right into this very inexpensive, like $2 from Japan, China adapter. Believe it or not, that is all that goes into making a tube lens. I know it sounds like it should be more complicated than that, but just those two adapters, and if anybody ever finds an M43 to F-mount adapter, please let me know, because then it would be only one adapter. Now we have to deal with the infinity space and our objective. Now, again, you may find one that does this. I've never found anything but the 25 to 52. If it comes in other sizes, I'm not aware of it. So we know that our objective is going to have to go in that. Now what we need is some way to get from a 49 millimeter filter thread to a 52 millimeter filter mount. All we really need is one tiny little ring. This is a 49 to 52 millimeter step-up ring. That's all there is to it. It steps this lens up to accept a filter of 52. This is going to act like a filter of 52. So we just screw this into the objective, into the tube lens. Make sure it's mounted. Screw the 52 millimeter adapter, and that is it. That is how you can shoot at 10x using your camera. Your camera mounts directly on here, and you have a 208 millimeter tube lens attached to your 10x Nikon objective. I told you earlier that one of the keys is to make sure that the space between the objective and the tube lens is small, the infinity space. If I take this off and let you look through the back of it, you'll see, I hope you can see just how close the back of the objective is to actually sitting on the glass. So this is a very short infinity space, which is best for our purposes. Let's say you wanted to mount the Raynox backwards because you mounted it frontwards and you were not impressed, and you want to see if you can get sharper images by mounting the Raynox backwards. It's still the same focal length, so the assembly is exactly the same, except now we need to find a way to mount a 49 millimeter filter ring to an F mount And then at the front, we need to find a way to attach the objective. This is why I recommend everybody start a collection of adapters, because after a while, you'll have so many that you almost always end up having the one that you need for any particular job. But let's think about it systematically. We know that this has to be a 52 because there isn't another adapter that's made that we know of. So to mount the Raynox backwards, we have to somehow mount the 52mm ring to the 43mm base of the Raynox, and we need to attach the 49mm filter ring of the Raynox to our F-mount. So we are going to need a 49 to 52mm step up ring. That will screw directly onto the front. Now all we need is a very standard macro reversing ring. This fits directly into the 52mm step up ring, like so, and this fits on the camera, or on the bellows I should say, which should fit like so. So to deal with the infinity space and to attach the objective to the back end of our Raynox, the first thing we need, actually the only thing we would need, would be a 43mm to 52mm coupling ring, which I don't have, but there's a workaround. That would be to use a 52 to 43 step down ring. So I'm screwing this onto the 43mm side, leaving a thread of 52mm here. Now, this also has a 52mm male thread, just like this does, but there is a trick for coupling the male threads of two adapters, and that is using a 55 to 52mm step down ring. And the only reason it works, and it only works in this size, none of the other step rings have this, but it has a continuous thread on the inside. And because of this continuous 52mm inside surface of this particular adapter, it means that I can screw it onto one 52mm ring from one side and screw another 52mm ring in from the other side. So it is really not acting as a step down ring at all. It just happens to have an interior thread, so I can screw two male threads together like a coupler. And this is a standard ring. It comes with your normal set of 82 to 26mm step up, step down rings. $20 for like 24 rings. It's a must have. Every macro photographer should have them. And you can see again, the infinity space is very small, maybe 6mm tops between the tube lens and the objective. And that, as we like to say here, is that. They are all the ways that you can adapt your system to work as a 5x, 7x, 10x magnification system of the highest optical quality for really relatively little money compared to what you're getting. We are going to stop here today because this really is a massive amount of information. And this is something you may need to come back to review. This is the way I recommend doing it, by the way, because of the flexibility of using this same device for all the magnifications I might want to use. Of course, I'd have to get the right Raynox. But just to show you how easy this is to use with extension tubes, that's it. I've just set it up to use with extension tubes by turning this into a tube lens. Now, you're probably thinking, well, hang on a second, that's not 161.5 millimeters. You're right, it probably isn't. I haven't measured it. It is, holy mackerel, it's about 164 millimeters, so it's pretty close, but it's not exact. If you want to go the extension tube methods, you don't want to spend $100 on some bellows, use the 2 sets of extension tubes you've got and buy an inexpensive helicoid to go with this. A helicoid it looks like a piece of extension tube, but when you twist it, it gets further apart and closer together. Good ones have a very fine control. Cheap ones are cheap, but you can use them to expand or contract the total length of your extension by a few millimeters either way. It's great. It's basically turns your extension tubes into kind of like a limited bellows. Some people just prefer the all-in-one piece without the bulkiness of the bellows, and some people actually shoot outdoors in the field with a setup like this. I don't have nearly steady enough hands anymore to do that. Not after my 9th cup of coffee in the morning. Anyway, that's it, guys. That's all you need to know about why you have to have one of these. You just really have to. If you have never done photography at magnification like 10x, you are in for a treat. It will blow you away. With the lower magnification, you can see better details of things that you knew were there, like antennas or feet or stingers. But when you get up to 10x, you're going to be looking at things that you didn't even know existed. And that will blow you away. To take photographs of parts of bugs that you had no idea were even there. And it just gets quite addictive. The more you do it, the more you want to do it. When we reconvene in a week or so, I am going to use this setup and show you a few of the tricky parts of using this, because it is a little bit more demanding to use than our 4x setup. Light becomes a little bit of an issue, but I'll show you a bunch of things that we can do, and we'll take some pictures and look at how they go. But I hope that you learn from this what you need and where you can get it. I will put links for all of these bits and pieces in the show notes. Thank you so much for joining me. If you found this useful, please check out my Patreon site. I now have a patron, which is spectacular. Hill, thank you for patronizing me. I never thought I'd want to be patronized, but I definitely want to be patronized now. Thank you so much for coming along and playing and making this such a worthwhile endeavor, and I'll see you in a few days. Adios.